Why did Jesus decide to deliberately go into the wilderness, the desert? On one of my previous videos, I talked about the Israelites and them going into the wilderness to escape from slavery from Egypt, and them staying there for 40 years. And at a later occasion, I thought about it, and I realized that Jesus actually went into the wilderness as well, the desert area. But he went there intentionally. He went there to get tempted. And it's such a strong contrast between Jesus and the Israelites, although they probably went through more or less the same ordeals. I mean, they went into the wilderness and they obviously were without food. And God supplied them food out of the sky, from heaven, just poured down on them like rain. And then when Jesus went into the wilderness, Satan came to him and he told him he can turn this stone into a bread and he can eat it. But Jesus went there to fast, and so he needed to resist that temptation of turning that stone into a bread and eat it, because he was fasting to be obedient. So in Matthew 4 verse 1, it specifically says, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil." So that's the reason he went there. He went into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, to withstand it and overcome basically what the Israelites failed to do. He was not lost, he wasn't wandering, he was simply led by the Spirit. Jesus was essentially led into the wilderness to relive what the Israelites went through when they came out of Egypt to escape slavery. The Israelites doubted that God will provide food for them, and in contrast to that, Jesus was tempted to turn the stones into food, and he resisted it because he was fasting. And he told the devil, "Man shall not live by bread alone." And this was definitely something that the Israelites needed to learn when they were in the wilderness. They needed to learn that you do not live by bread alone, but by every word that God speaks. So they needed to listen to what God was trying to teach them in the wilderness before they could go out of the wilderness into the promised land. And they failed at that. The second thing that they did was they demanded proof all the time of God being God. They basically made tests for God to prove himself to them. And in contrast to that, Jesus was tempted to throw himself off a temple, and he resisted by quoting Deuteronomy 6 verse 16 that says, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." And this is in direct contrast to what the Israelites did when they were in the wilderness. They constantly wanted proof that God was looking after them. They were testing God all the time by giving him basically challenges that would prove that he was still with them and watching over them, and that he was actually real. The third one was when they created the golden calf to basically worship rather than God. And in contrast to this, Jesus was tempted because at that stage when he was in the wilderness, the devil basically told him to bow down and worship him. And he replied by quoting Deuteronomy 6 verse 13, "Worship the Lord your God and serve him only." So through those three tests alone, I'm sure there were more, but those were just the ones that I could read up about now. He went in direct contrast to what the Israelites did in their time that they spent in the wilderness. And he basically passed the test where they failed it miserably. And that's one of the reasons also why they stayed there for 40 years, because they couldn't learn the lessons that God wants to teach them. The wilderness itself isn't the problem. How we walk through it is the problem. And there are two kinds of wilderness. The wilderness like Israel went through, they were there because of fear and bad decisions and disobedience. And they stayed there for much longer than they were meant to be. And then in contrast to that, there is the wilderness that Jesus showed us. where God led him there. The Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tested and basically to strengthen him before he could go on to his next challenge. And basically at that point is when he started his ministry. The wilderness didn't break Jesus. It revealed his obedience to God. Israel entered the wilderness to escape slavery. Jesus entered the wilderness to defeat the temptation. Israel left the wilderness still struggling with faith, while Jesus left the wilderness ready to begin his ministry. Sometimes the wilderness is a place we get stuck in because we refuse to trust in God. Other times it is where we go to prepare ourselves for our next journey in life, something that is coming up. God wants to maybe prepare us for something that is coming, and we aren't prepared at that stage, but He's sending us into the wilderness to learn some lessons and get prepared for whatever is coming. The question isn't if we will face wilderness areas. All people in life go through some challenges at some point. The point of it is to learn something and go through the wilderness and come out the other side a stronger person and stronger in faith and all these kinds of things, so that we can take what we learned in the wilderness and take on the challenges that we get when we exit the wilderness, whenever that is. I just wanted to share that with you guys because it was quite interesting to me that it was so specifically directed to be a contrast between the Israelites and what Jesus did when He was in the wilderness area. And it's so important for us to learn from this and take it with us and not wander around in the wilderness like the Israelites did. It's not God's plan for us to stay in the wilderness. It's God's plan for us to maybe just learn something and then come out the other side stronger. So yeah, I just wanted to leave you guys with that, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Alright, keep well. Cheers.